and welcome to the Scholar Progenium. Today we're going to be looking at Warlord's new tank game, Achtung Panzer, and I'm going to show you guys how to put together a couple of lists. So first up, I just want to say a massive thank you to Warlord Games. They've sorted me out with the rules for Achtung Panzer and all of the cards and tokens and bits and pieces that I could possibly need to start filming you guys some battle reports for Achtung Panzer, because, you know, essentially that's what we do here on the Scholar Progenium. So what is Achtung Panzer as a game? Now, of course, you guys know that it's a tank skirmish game, but more than that, what's the experience? How does it play? Well, essentially, what Warlord have put together here is a very dynamic, sort of fast back and forth game, which in terms of the core rules, in terms of activations, initiative, movement, it's very straightforward and simple. However, in terms of the way shooting works and the damage that accumulates on vehicles in terms of the vehicles themselves and also effects on the crew that are driving the vehicle, that is where the depth comes in, and that adds some real flavour to the game. You really can sort of picture what's going on within the inside each of your tanks. Essentially, as a broad overview, the way it plays is that each tank gets to activate 3 times per turn. Now, it's an interesting spin on a common way of doing things. If you've played a lot of skirmish games, Malifaux, Kill Team, Warcry, all of that, you'll be relatively aware of sort of the concept of action points, or how many actions a model can take in a turn. Maybe it can take 2 actions, maybe it can take 3 actions, something like that. Well, Warlord have that same thing, but instead of you picking a tank and doing all 3 activations in one go and then it goes to someone else, they pick their model, they do their 2-3 activations. It's you cycle through the initiative order of the tanks and they do 1 activation at a time, or kind of 1.5 to 1, and or bits and bobs, if that makes sense. There's extra bits you can do. So you might with your first activation move and load in an armor piercing shell, or audio loader to get an armor piercing shell ready. In your second activation, you pivot and push out of a bit of cover, so you're ready to shoot a tank in the open, and you load that shell into the breach. And then with your third activation, and then everyone else is doing their stuff, all your other tanks go as well. And then in your final activation, you are going to maybe halt where you are and fire that shell off. So you're not supposed to sort of and ah over every move. That way the game would take forever. This is supposed to be played rapidly. You just cycle through those tanks. I'm doing this, you're doing that. I'm doing this, you're doing that. And you're, responding to what the other tanks are doing. You see them turn to face you. You're like, pivot the turret, that kind of thing. You can imagine the crew sort of communicating to each other as you're giving these individual orders a little bit at a time throughout the turn. So really, really cool, fast, dynamic game. And as you take damage, as you get hits on your running gear, on your turret, they've got different armor to your chassis and the front and the sides and so on and so forth. And the different shells that hit you can do different damage, and the effects. If you've got your commander out on the open, for example, you get hit by an HE shell, he can get wounded, he can get knocked out, he can be forced down inside the tank for the rest of the game. So he, daren't poke his head out, he's sort of stunned, so on and so forth. So it's just a really interesting back and forth where you sort of play with your tanks, and it does exactly what you want a tank game to do, in that the crew are individuals inside the tank and you get to play out what they are doing. You're taking crew tests. The driver has to be able to get into cover and that kind of thing. The gunner, you can force him to load a shell in really quickly. If you fail that check, then the gun's going to jam. But if you pass it, then you're going to be able to fire quicker. So that's sort of decisions that you're making within the game. So it's really, really interesting depth to the individual sort of crews, and you'll be really gutted if you lose a great driver or a great gunner or someone like that. Why do I talk about losing valued crew members? Well, it's because Warlord have integrated into this a campaign system, and I think because each game's going to be so rapid, it's going to be very interesting where sort of gaming night where you're playing Achtung Panzer, you're realistically probably going to be able to play a 2 or 3 game campaign within that session, if that makes sense, once you get into the flow of the rules and you get into the rhythm of activating your tanks. So essentially, that's really cool to me, because there's so many games that come with, bonus campaign rules, and chance would be a fine thing. You and your mates, you get this idea together, you maybe got a group chat on it, coming up with your little factions, you're painting up little models and posting pictures of them, and you're like, right, we're going to do this campaign. And then you might get 2 or 3 games and then one person can't make it and then another person can't make it, and so on and so forth. And that was all she wrote. However, with Achtung Panzer, because it's dynamic, fast-paced, short individual games, you can essentially start off with a regular or inexperienced crew at the start of the night, have like 2 or 3 tanks each at the most, play your first game, maybe lose a tank, it gets brewed up, you lose half the crew, maybe one of your other tanks upgrades, and maybe one of your other tanks gains a quirk, a bad habit or a good habit that benefits or affects the tank and the way it plays in a certain way, and they get it's really cool. And then you'd play your second game, see how that affects your tanks, maybe bring in some reinforcements, so on and so forth. Then you play your third game. Obviously you can have much bigger games, but I can see a real sort of bonus to playing just a simple 50-point list and having a campaign where your characters evolve over the course of the evening, which you'll be able to tell tales of and sort of swap stories of for years to come. So I hope that's given you a bit of a better feel, a bit of an idea on my perspective at least of how the game system's going to play out. Now let's have a look at how we put some forces together. Let's play with some tanks. That's what we're here for, really, isn't it? Now, the list building has quite an interesting aspect to it in that it's almost comes in 2 stages. You've got your list building where you decide what your tanks are going to be and you decide the experience of your crew, and you can do that, in your own time, if that makes sense. You could save the crew till you're with your friend if you want, but it's whatever. However, before the game starts, you also get to add additional assets to your forces, and that comes in as a sort of second stage when you're actually at the gaming table, and I think that's just a really cool twist. So I'm going to be giving you an example of that now with the Germans, and we'll do the Brits as well, just for a bit of perspective. First up, we'll have a quick look at the Germans, and what really are our options? Well, we get an absolute boatload of options for every faction. So just in terms of the Germans, I'll show you what we've got. Each card is double-sided, nice quality, by the way, on a side note, and as you can see, we've got multiple different versions of different tanks as well. There's 3 Panthers alone. So we've got the Panzer 4H here on the back, we've got a Jagdpanzer, a Hetzer 38T, we've got a Nashorn, we've got Elephant, nice, more Hetzers, that'll be another Panzer 4. So you get multiple copies of the common ones, so you can build platoons of sort of similar vehicles, that kind of thing. We've got the Tiger 1H, we've got the Tiger 1E, we've got the Jagdpanzer 470, we've got the Jagdpanzer 48, we've got another Panzer 4, a G this time, with an F1 on the back, a couple of those, 3 of those in fact, and another one of those. And then each faction also gets a couple of special characters, which is really cool. So we've got Otto Carius, who's best known for his service in the German army, particularly as an ace tank commander on the Eastern Front, and it goes on. And that's really cool as well, a little photograph of the tank commander and some background to him, and then they'll have extra ace skills, special abilities, which let you do do cool stuff. Let's take a look at the units that I've selected for my force. So I've gone for a Stug 3G, and I've also gone for a Panther. These are just tanks that I have in my collection that I absolutely love playing with. So, of course, I'm going to start there with this new game. There's a couple of different options. There's 3 different Panther variants, and they all are relatively similar in terms of points, but a couple of different aspects. So I thought I'd show you so you can get an idea of how different classes work. So the A and the G have a slight difference in terms of hull armor, with the A being slightly lighter in armor, but they have the same amount of dice that they fire in terms of spotting or aiming, 2 and 3 respectively. And then in terms of the D, that actually is less accurate unless it's aimed. So it's the same firepower if it's aimed, but if it's just spotted a vehicle, it's only going to get 1 dice to roll, so much less likely to hit. Now, I'm not going to go into deep rules here. We're going to have plenty of how to play videos coming up soon, but I've gone for the G, and that's sort of the minor differences there. Now, let's have a look at what we do after we've selected our vehicles. So next up, we need to establish the veterancy of our crew. Now, I've spent 50 points here, this simple 50-point list, and I've gone for a medium caliber Stug crew and a high caliber Panther crew, of course, the creme de la creme. Now, this is where things get a little interesting, and the ears of the historic wargamers might prick up here, it has to be said, because if you're really into your historical gaming, one of the aspects I've found, and I am by no means an experienced, like, proper long-beard historical gamer by any means, but one thing I've found when dabbling in those kinds of things is that points and like perfectly balanced forces aren't really a consideration. It's more about creating a cool scenario and battle, and this is not a massive aspect of Achtung Panzer, but there is a little bit when it comes to the crew caliber, because although you've paid your points for your crew, you then have a little bit of randomness where you roll to see how many sort of experience points you get based on that initial cost, and that can vary a little bit, and then you use those experience points, they're called like crew stars, to select the veterancy. Do you have a veteran commander but inexperienced green driver, or so on and so forth? So we'll check that out now. So it says in the rulebook that a medium caliber crew is a tank with a crew where the majority are trained in their roles and they've seen some action. Now I roll a d6 on a table and I get a 1. So a 1 on a medium caliber crew gives me 4 crew stars, which I can distribute amongst my crew members. And that range on a d6 is from 4 to 7. So I've missed out on 3 potential extra experience points at the start of the game or campaign. You see, I think although this may seem like, oh my gosh, like if the other person rolls a 6 on both their tanks and you roll 1 on both of yours, you're already at a massive disadvantage. But if you're playing sort of 3 games back to back, 3 little skirmishes, and your crew are going to gain experience depending on who they're fighting and so on and so forth, what they achieve, then that's really going to water down the initial, like, oh my gosh, my opponent has a better force than me from the output. So you might start slightly on the back foot, but that should sort of level out, and it should be really cool seeing your sort of underdogs come back fighting. So with that roll, I'm going to have only 4 stars to distribute amongst my crew members. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give my driver just 1 star. That means he's going to pass crew rating, crew tests, sort of skill tests on a 4 up. So if I want to drive through Bocage and not become immobilized, I have to essentially pass a test on a 4 up. If I fail it, I roll another dice, and if I get a 1, then the tank will be stuck. So I'm not too worried about that. I'm going to risk my driver starting off green. Let's see if he can gain some experience as he goes. Now, there's loads of other aspects to it as well, but that's just one little tidbit. As I said, there's quite some depth to the crew rules and how they interact throughout a game or campaign. Now, next up, I'm going to give my gunner 1 star as well. So a bit green around the gills, so to speak, but we'll see if he can learn his trade on sort of rapidum on. Then I'm going to give my 2 stars. So my commander is going to pass tests on a 3 up, and there's sort of 3 veterancy ratings, or there's 4 veterancy ratings, with the final one being ace, which you can't buy at the start of the game. You can only get in a campaign. You can only sort of earn aces unless you're using one of the special characters for a bit of fun, one of the cards I showed you earlier. But in terms of normal crew, they can either be green, regular, or veteran. And with veterancy comes certain extra abilities. So hopefully we roll a little better with my Panther. Now, this time I've only got 2. So we're starting off on the back foot against the Brits for the Germans. So on a 2, I'm looking at him now. He's a high caliber crew. So a 2 actually gets me 6 stars, and that ranges from 6 to 9. So we've got ourselves 6 stars. We've got a bit more to play with there. This time I'm going to mix it up a bit. Now, of course, I could go for 3 evenly trained crew on the trained rating. But what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to make my gunner veteran on this Panther. Now, that's because I want that bonus special ability that veterans get. And for a gunner, what that means is that he gets to re-roll 1s. So if I've aimed at a target, I've taken that extra action to aim, and then I fire, I get to roll 3 dice, re-rolling 1s, which surely means I have to hit. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to give my driver, he's new, fresh into the crew, maybe replacing another member who's been previously wounded or transferred or promoted perhaps. So the driver's going to be fresh, and then the gunner, the commander, I'm going to have him as trained. So green, veteran, and trained. Now, there's an extra element to this, another reason why it's good to have bonus stars, sort of highly trained crew members, and that is over the course of the game, the way it works is that if you take damage to the crew members, if they take certain effects from penetrating hits and that kind of thing, then they can become injured and they lose stars as a consequence of that, potentially downgrading them so they don't have certain abilities or they fight less effectively in other ways. So before we go on to the German asset cards, we need to have a look at the Brits so we can see what the 2 forces are facing off against each other, because that actually affects how many asset cards you can have available to you. So what we've got here is we've gone for a Cromwell Mark 7 and he's rated as high. We've also gone for a Humber Mark 4 and he is also rated as high, but it's only 9 points. We also have this Churchill Mark 6 here, and he is also rated as high. So for 50 points, we're getting an extra vehicle and a lot more crew caliber for the Brits here. But overall, the armour, although comparable to a Panther, so for example, this Panther A here is 13 on the front of the turret, 6 on the side, and 12 on the hull, 6 on the side. This Churchill and this Cromwell, they're only around the 10 mark. The Churchill is tougher on the sides though. The the Humber can basically be knocked out by a stiff breeze. It only has, and it can even fit on its card, but it only has an armour rating of 3 on the front of the turret, 2 on the front of the hull, and 1 on the sides. So he's getting knocked out super easy, but he does have one very interesting aspect to him, which I really want to try out, which is he has a light gun. And one of the rules for light gun is that you don't have to take an action to load your ammunition from the ammunition rack into the loader and then another action ready to fire. But instead, you can just load a round from the ammunition rack straight into the ready slot and fire it with the next activation. Now, the Humber Mark II is even more interesting. Its autocannon always counts as loaded, so it just fires. You can just fire it every activation, just drive around with your Mark II, just blapping off shots. But as you can see, it hits on a 6. With one shot if you're spotted. You've got 2 chances to hit on a 6 if you've aimed at them, and you've got 0 penetration. So the chance of it doing anything is rather small. So I've gone for the Mark IV there, because I do want to try out the different sort of speeds of loading, and because I think that's going to be quite interesting. Now let's have a look at what crew calibers we get with these guys. So we'll do the Cromwell first, and he gets a 4. Now with that crew rating, I'm going to give this guy a 1-star green driver. I'm going to give the other 6 points out, 3 each, to my commander and my gunner. So not only does this guy get a reroll 1s to hit, and if he aims, he gets 3 dice. But even if he only spotted it, he gets 1 dice, which is okay. On top of that, having a veteran commander gives you a whole host of additional abilities. You can draw more cards, you can have a larger maximum hand size in terms of cards, and you also get a higher roll potentially for the assets when we get to that stage of the game. Next up, we'll go for the Humber, and this time we only get a 1. Now he is high experience, so a 1 is still going to give me 6 crew points. Now with the Humber, instead of aiming to get a veteran special ability or anything like that, I'm just going to try and make sure this guy's super reliable, and I'm going to make sure that each of the crew are trained. So they're all, although I'm not going to get any veteran special abilities at the start of the game, they've got a good jumping off point if they upgrade, if we're playing a campaign match. And if we're playing a one-off match, I'm going to be passing those skill checks more often, avoiding calamities, avoiding sort of unexpected disasters, and I'm also going to be a little more resilient to being downgraded from my crew taking injuries. Now finally for the Churchill Mark VI, and this time we get 3, so that again is going to be 7, I believe. So this time I'm going to go for a veteran gunner. Make sure I get those rerolls to hit. I'm going to go for a regular commander. So he's pretty reliable at getting the job done, and the driver is going to be regular as well. And so overall that gives me a nice mix, a nice spread of crew points. And so let's have a look at what assets we can bring to the table now that we've got our 2 armies ready to face off against each other. In terms of cards in play, apart from these cards, of course, you have got your deck of event cards. But on top of that, they are actually separate to your asset cards. And the way this works is you buy your assets at the beginning of the game, and then you have to draw one of these reinforcement cards into your hand. And that allows you to play an asset that you've purchased at the beginning of the game to one side, and then you can activate that whenever you're ready or whenever the card tells you to. So for example, if I had bought this airstrike card and I get a reinforcements card in my hand from the event deck turn 2 for example, then immediately I can activate my airstrike. Now I don't have to play it straight away, but I just bring it into play ready to go. And then the effect is resolve an attack against a random enemy tank. So this one you can do immediately. But some of the other assets, for example, a sniper, there may not be any unbuttoned enemy commanders, but if one of the commanders unbuttons, you can immediately activate this because you've already brought in that reinforcement. Now, in terms of acquiring asset cards, things are pretty straightforward. At the start of the game, you look at how many tanks there are in total across both sides. So of course, because we've got our 3 British vehicles here, and we've also got our Panther and our Stug, we're going to have 5 vehicles in total. That means that both players roll a d6 and and add 1 to it. If you've got just 2 tanks, it's d6. 3 to 6 is d6 plus 1. So that's probably going to be the most common. And then you get d6 plus 2 if you've got 7 or more tanks. And you can purchase cards based on their asset point value. So for example, a sniper costs 1 point. An airstrike costs 2 points, 2 stars, these little stars at the top here. Assault engineers that let you remove vehicles, clear cover, that kind of thing, they're 2 stars. You can use an anti-tank gun that's off the field. I can't actually afford that. That is 5 stars. That's unavailable to me. I haven't got any anti-tank guns, no 88s in the field today. However, I can get my hands on a 75mm pack gun. If you can trace line of sight from your side's base edge to an enemy tank, resolve an attack. Roll 3 dice, needing a 6, and it's got a pen of 5. So if someone's got their back or their side to your table edge, you can just pop a shot and possibly knock that tank out, especially if it's already taken a little bit of damage. Overall, you get a choice basically of whether you're going to bring multiple assets, a couple of tank hunters, unit of infantry, a unit of close assault, panzer knackers, or whether you want those 1 big hits ready to go when you get that event card. How many event card reinforcement events do you think you're going to get over the course of the game? Might be something that we'll sort of learn as we go, I suppose. So for my Germans, I've decided to go for tank hunters, which allows me to shoot at a tank on 3 dice, needing a 6. With a penetration 5 value, that's pretty decent against the Brits, from a piece of uncleared terrain. Now, obviously you're not going to have infantry in the terrain. This is a tanks game after all. However, one of the benefits of having HE shells, machine guns and so on and so forth, the way they all come into play is in clearing out terrain so you know you're safe from it, and that prevents your opponent from playing cards that come out of that bit of terrain. So if my opponent's not cleared terrain to their rear and they move past it, I'm going to pop a shot with my tank hunters. On top of that, I'm going for a squad of infantry, and that allows me to potentially clear a bit of terrain myself. So if there's a bit of terrain that I know I want to shoot or move from or move beyond, then I'm going to clear that out with the infantry. And then finally, I'm going to go for a cheeky sniper because I can cause enemy commander to have to button up for the rest of the game. That means the commander's going to have his hatch closed, cowering away, and that means you don't get certain benefits. Your tank shoots better and so on and so forth if you are sort of stood up out of the cupola. Or potentially I can roll on the button up table, which is essentially the table you roll on when the tank gets hit by machine gun fire, HE, shrapnel, artillery, that kind of thing. And that has the potential to wound a commander that is stood up outside of his cupola. So that could be a potentially very powerful card. You could wound or even kill your opponent's tank commander. One of the interesting things is if you, over a campaign, upgrade one of your veterans to an ace, if it's a commander, then you get to roll 2 dice at the start of the game and pick the highest results. You're much more likely to be able to pull some strings if you've got an ace commander on your side, which I think is really cool. That you maybe get a little more support, a few more assets from high command. Gonna keep that ace alive, keep the propaganda flowing. So one of the things you'll notice that's very interesting about the cards available, the assets, is that although some of them are the same, all factions get infantry, so on and so forth, there are some interesting twists to some of the other cards. For example, the British get a 17-pounder, undoubtedly a powerful anti-tank weapon, but not quite as powerful as an 88, as we know. And they are slightly different in terms of cost. The 17-pounder is only 4 stars, the 88's 5 stars. However, the penetration of the 17-pounder is only 6, and the penetration of the 88 is 7. So it's nice that that although every faction gets access to the same assets, which keeps things fair, there is a little bit of flavour to it, a little bit of individuality to the different factions beyond just the tanks. I just think that's a really nice twist, in my personal opinion. And so for the Brits, I've just gone for one asset. I'm going for a 6-pounder anti-tank gun. I get to roll 3 dice if I can trace line of sight from my side of the table edge to an enemy tank, which is really likely, and that's at any point in the battlefield, essentially once I've brought my asset into play with an event card. And then I get to roll 3 dice, needing a 6 with a pen of 3. So if he turns his back to my table edge for even a split second, I'm going to pop that shot. So with all that being said, guys, I think I'm going to call it there for this video. I hope it's given you a little bit of a taste for Achtung Panzer and how you can put your forces together so you can start visualising what tanks you're going to bring from your collection to your first games of Achtung Panzer. So I hope you found this video interesting. I hope you found it entertaining. This has been the Scholar Progenium. Thank you very much for your time. Goodbye.